So, 17-year-old Michael had no idea that making a pizza delivery would lead him into a trap. That night, he wasn't the only one knocking on doors. Michael's name really was Michael, and this story happened years ago. He was 17 at the time and lived in a small town in New Jersey. During the summer, he worked night shifts at a pizza place on the outskirts of town to make money. He wasn't thrilled with the job, but with family pressure and no money, he had no other choice. The pizza place was truly a terrible spot. The pizza tasted awful, customer numbers were very low, and Michael could never understand this situation. Why would anyone order such bad pizza? Have you ever received such a strange delivery order? Write in the comments. I'm curious. That night when the tablet rang, an online order came in. Large sausage and olive pizza. Michael found the olive pizza order strange because they never got olive orders. The address was in a completely deserted place, outside their delivery zones. His manager told him to take the delivery because they hadn't had a single order for over an hour. When the pizza was ready, Michael hit the road. At least he would kill 40 minutes. As he was about to leave the store, he looked more carefully at the delivery instructions. Stapled to the box, the paper read, "Park on the street behind the house. Walk through the backyard. Knock on the back door only." This instruction caught Michael's attention, but his 17-year-old brain thought there could be logical reasons for this. Maybe there was an elderly person in the house, or a baby was sleeping. Maybe the front door was being repaired. When he stepped outside, he had second thoughts. It was one of those summer nights, hot as soup, humid and completely still, as if even the air was stuck in some invisible jelly. There was that sour, stale smell that comes out in humid and still weather, a mixture of old plastic and sun-baked soil. Michael hated this smell. The 25-minute drive felt longer than usual because the roads were completely empty. GPS directed him to the back of the house, to the narrow side street that ran parallel to the backyards. There were no streetlights, and the house's back porch lights weren't on either. Everything was covered in shadows. If you were in this situation, would you turn back or continue? Michael slowed down and double-checked the house number because it looked completely dead. There were no lights inside, no car in the driveway. Just a sagging backyard, overgrown grass, and a rotten wooden fence that didn't even close properly. Still, he followed the instructions. He parked on the gravel shoulder, took the pizza, and walked uphill toward the back door. He had the pizza in one hand and a flashlight in the other, pointing it down at his feet so he wouldn't trip on anything. When he reached the top of the hill, he saw the back door. It was one of those old white doors with a small glass panel at the top, covered by a cheap curtain. He knocked and waited, but no one answered. He knocked a second time, knowing his manager would be furious to see him return empty-handed. As he was about to knock a third time, he saw the curtain move. Not much, just a tiny twitch, like someone brushed it with their finger. It was fast, and he wouldn't have noticed if he hadn't been staring at the glass. He stood there for a few more seconds, expecting the person clearly standing right behind the door to finally open up. But before that happened, he noticed two unmarked cars pulling up to the side street behind his car. His first thought was that he was about to get in trouble for trespassing. One of the car doors opened and someone stepped out. Even from the house, he could make out in the light of the other car's headlights that it was a man. The guy motioned for him to walk over, and Michael did, assuming this was the person who had ordered the pizza and had beaten him home from work. But as he got closer, he realized the man was flashing something in his hand. It was a badge. The guy was an undercover police officer, not wearing a uniform, just normal clothes. Michael didn't know it yet, but what saved his life that night wasn't just luck. Once he got within a certain distance, the officer told him to head back to his car and wait there. That was it. That's all he said. So Michael did. He slowly backed away, climbed into the delivery car, and sat there watching. That's when he realized there weren't just two officers. There were 5, maybe more. All of them had flashlights, but none of them said a word. They moved stealthily, circling the house like they were trying not to be seen. None of them knocked or announced their presence, which Michael found strange. It was a pretty bizarre sight. He remembered one of the officers reaching for the back door handle, the same one he had just knocked on, and gently trying it. When it didn't open, he just nodded at one of the other guys and backed off. It felt like he was watching something he wasn't supposed to see, and he guessed he was. Eventually, the first officer came back to his car and crouched beside the window. Michael rolled it down, and the officer looked over the pizza box on the passenger seat and let out a short sigh. What he told him was relatively vague, but he didn't seem like a tool, just that he was trying not to say too much. Basically, he said there was an ongoing investigation involving that property, and that he, along with the rest of the officers, were staking it out. He apologized for taking so long to intervene and told Michael that he had pulled up at the exact time they were repositioning their vehicles. "Would you have offered to show the delivery order in this situation?" Michael asked if he wanted to see the delivery order, and the officer nodded. He pulled it up on the delivery app, but he could tell it was useless. There was an associated phone number with the order along with the delivery address and the first name, Jerry, but it didn't seem particularly helpful. The officer read it, took the number down, then told Michael to leave immediately. Michael expressed his frustration, saying his boss was going to kill him for returning with the pizza, and the guy just shrugged his shoulders. Then he repeated his instruction to leave and started walking away from the car. Michael was pissed, but there was nothing he could do, so he drove off. It took him the entire ride back for the whole thing to sink in. He didn't really grasp the gravity of the situation until stepping out of the car. If the police hadn't intervened when they did, something awful could have happened. He didn't even know what. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the threat of the police was probably the only reason the person didn't open the door to accept the pizza. But why would someone order pizza if they were being staked out? Michael continued to think about questions he would never get answers to. At the beach house in Delaware, when he heard that breathing sound coming from inside the walls, he had no idea he would experience the biggest fear of his life. David's story happened last year. He's now 40, married with 2 sons aged 7 and 5. He works in the insurance sector. Sounds boring because it is. But they're stable, and he thinks that's all that matters at this point in life. A couple of years ago, his father passed away after a long battle with cancer. He left behind a beach house in Delaware that David had never seen before because he used to rent it out year-round. It's nothing flashy or big, but it's in a fantastic location just 1 block from the beach. His favorite part by far is the upstairs back deck that provides a really nice view of the ocean. After his father passed, they started going there every summer, using it as their escape. A week here, a weekend there. It became their little family tradition. Do you also have such a family refuge? Where do you escape in summer? As much as David and his wife love spending time there, the boys love it even more. They spend hours playing on the beach, riding bikes, and exploring the town. It feels like a gift his father left behind for them to enjoy. This story takes place during one of those weeks last summer. They had gone down in mid-July, a Sunday through Friday kind of thing when the crowds would thin out mid-week and the beach was a little quieter. He remembers the night clearly. It was a Wednesday. The boys had knocked out around 9:30 after a long day in the sun, and David and his wife were sitting on the back deck playing cards and sipping wine. That's when their older son Jordan came outside. He had an uneasy look on his face. He told David he kept hearing a scratching noise in his room and it was keeping him awake. David glanced at his wife, then set his glass down and stood up, telling Jordan he'd go check it out. He told his wife to hang tight. He figured it was probably just generic house sounds. It is a pretty old house after all. The boys don't share a room, so he figured there was no need to wake their younger one. He followed Jordan downstairs to his room, and Jordan pointed to the wall near his bed and motioned for him to be quiet. They both stood there for a while, and David didn't hear anything at first, but he didn't want Jordan to think he didn't believe him, so he stood there a little while longer. After maybe 20 seconds, he finally heard it. Faint at first, but definitely there. A soft scratching sound, just like Jordan had described. David crouched down and pressed his ear to the wall. It didn't sound like an animal in the rafters. It sounded like it was coming from inside the wall, lower down and closer to the baseboards. The next sound David heard would follow him for the rest of his life. That's when he heard it breathing. Not an animal. Definitely not. It was deep, slow, human breathing. David flinched back and let out a sharp, "Jesus," without even meaning to. And then, he's not kidding about this, he heard the most guttural and angry scream he'd ever heard ring out from somewhere inside the wall. It caught him so off guard that he yelled out again, a feeling of existential dread hitting him right in the face. He grabbed Jordan by the arm and yanked him out of the room. They ran down the hall to get their younger son, Scott, who was still sound asleep. He didn't even give him a chance to open his eyes. He just scooped him up in his arms and ran. Audience question: what would you do in such a situation? Would you call the police or try to handle it yourself? Getting back upstairs to the deck where his wife was, that was the only other thing on his mind at that point. As they reached the base of the stairs, he yelled for his wife. And then he heard another scream come from somewhere behind him, only much closer this time. He turned around and saw a man covered in filth charging down the hallway straight at them. He nearly tripped trying to get up the stairs with both his sons, but they made it upstairs and onto the deck just in time. Not 2 seconds after he slammed the sliding door shut, the guy hit the glass full force. David genuinely thought it would shatter. He started clawing at the door like an animal, shrieking and pounding, all the while yelling things David can't bring himself to repeat. He threw his body against the door and yelled at his wife to grab the kids and call the police. She grabbed them and covered their ears, pulling them back from the scene. David kept his eyes on the man's eyes, trying to block the view of him from his family. The man was wild, completely unhinged. His hand smeared something. Dirt, blood. David didn't even know. He smeared that filthy stuff across the glass as he clawed and tried to force the door open. David doesn't know how long he held it shut. A minute? 5. It felt like forever. The man seemingly had unlimited energy because it took all David's strength to keep that door shut, and the man didn't let up once. David learned that night how powerful the instinct to protect family could be, but when he learned that the man had been living under the same roof with them for months. Taylor and Emma were 16 years old and loved watching stars in the countryside. That night, in the 5 seconds they blinked, they completely lost each other, and they still don't know how this was possible. Emma grew up in a kind of rural area where you could ride your bike for miles without seeing another person. Like a lot of people, her favorite season was always summer. It still is, actually, but it's been a while since she lived in the middle of nowhere, so summer's lost a little bit of its charm. A lot of what made summer so special to her is tied to life in the middle of nowhere. There was something about the warmth, quiet, and emptiness she loved. Something she could never find in the city. It's hard to explain, but she just felt so isolated. But in a good way. Like she had her own little corner of the earth all to herself. Summer nights were always the best. The darkness added to the feeling of privacy and freedom that the little girl she used to be craved. She was 16 at the time. She had a friend back then named Taylor. She was a little more reckless than Emma, always pushing the limits in small ways. Who was your most reckless friend when you were 16? What adventures did you have? One random night in July, they decided to go stargazing. Just them, 2 bikes and a bottle of wine. It wasn't the first time they had done something like this. Actually, it's something they did quite often. That is until what Emma's about to tell you happened. Come to think of it, this was probably one of the last times they went stargazing together. They didn't have a specific plan, just a direction. They wanted to go somewhere new since the old spots were getting a little repetitive. Taylor said she knew a good spot past the edge of town, some abandoned stretch of farmland where nobody would ever bother them. It was sometime around 10 o'clock when they left. Emma's not sure how long they biked, Maybe 20 minutes, maybe 30, but they didn't stop until they were past anything even remotely civilized. At some point, Taylor just stopped her bike abruptly and told Emma they were here. Emma wasn't really sure what here meant, since there were no descriptive landmarks around, but it still felt perfect. Wide open field, no buildings, no fences, no cows, just a huge patch of grass and the endless starry sky. They spread out a blanket and popped the cork with the little opener Taylor had somehow remembered to bring. Emma started feeling the wine's effect and began wondering if Taylor wanted something more than friendship from the way she looked at her. It was some cheap red wine that didn't taste all that good, but it did the job. They laid there for a while, passing the bottle back and forth, pointing out the few constellations they remembered by name. Their goal on nights like this was always the same: try and spot a shooting star. At one point, Taylor asked Emma if she thought they'd actually see one, and Emma told her probably not, but to keep looking anyway. They're not as uncommon out in the country where you can see so many stars, but you still have to pay attention. Shooting star or not, though, they were having a great night. The wine was definitely doing its job, and Emma started feeling herself slipping into drunkenness. It was the kind of night that made you feel like time didn't exist. This isn't super relevant to the story, but it's one of the few things Emma remembers about the night, so she's going to quickly tell you anyway. There was a very brief moment that felt like a blip in the rhythm of the night. They were leaning back, and Taylor looked at Emma in this way that made her wonder if Taylor wanted something more than friendship. Have you ever had such a moment with your closest friend? Growing up, Emma always had that suspicion about Taylor, but it was never motivated by anything more than curiosity. But that night, it felt a little stronger than she could recall it ever being. She didn't ask, didn't say anything. That kind of thing just wasn't talked about openly where they grew up. And besides, maybe she was just tipsy and reading too much into things. Either way, it passed. They laughed about something dumb, Taylor said, and then looked up just in time to catch a shooting star streak across the sky. If anyone has ever seen a shooting star, they know the uncontrollable reaction it elicits. Like you just can't help but laugh or shout something out into the night. The two of them giggled, and Taylor told Emma to make a wish. She doesn't remember what it was. Probably something silly. They leaned back and talked for a few more minutes, their moods a little uplifted from seeing the shooting star. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, not to fall asleep, just to feel the breeze on her face for a second and settle further into the stillness. She swears on her life her eyes were not closed for more than 5 seconds, but when she opened them, Taylor was gone. Emma looked at her phone and it was exactly 3 a.m., and when she learned that Taylor also claimed to wake up alone at the same time, she began to question how reality worked.